What happened? Where am I? Am I alive yet?
What's up, all you idiots and morons, healthy people, good-looking people, hell, even ugly people, whatever you are out there. Hope your day, your night, your evening, whatever it is treating you well. If not, find a way to make it better. Preferably alcohol. Don't get too crazy with the alcohol, though. Let's be real there. Evening, morning, afternoon. Merry Christmas, whatever it may be for you. I have a few things to talk about. Well, we won't go into like the deeper stuff. I thought I would keep this one a little funner, a little looser, I guess. And maybe tomorrow I'll do more of a serious cast episode. But we're gonna get into the WCW, WWF, now WWE, Monday Night Wars that were fun back in the day. If you don't know it or not, WWE silently, let me use the quotes like our guys on that one podcast, silently announced a WCW YouTube channel. And it's a channel dedicated to WCW matches. And they got, I mean, it's live 24 hours right now. And it's showing just episodes of WCW's history. Like earlier today, they showed the Thunder, the first Thunder, which was outrageously funny. And I'll get into that and explain it in a bit, but it goes through a bunch of WCW's history. A lot of this that has been missing, and I don't know how long they'll be live because it says a launch party, so it could just be that this is just for the weekend, and then they're just gonna go putting videos up. Who knows? But they're doing a launch party, so if you get the opportunity and you love WCW from back in the day, definitely go check it out. But as you can see, they have a bunch of different matches that they uploaded today. You got Luger showing up on Nitro. You have Rey Mysterio versus the Ultimate Dragon. A bunch of Sting. There's Goldberg versus Hogan, the one that was in Atlanta that people complained that should have been a pay-per-view, but I was fine watching it live when it happened. You got the Outsiders with Hogan doing his turn, Sting and Hogan in Starrcade '97, which was probably the worst handled match. But as you know by now, just hearing the history of everything that happened with that, you can understand. I saw today too, and they've moved to. There's some stuff that's part of the WWE that they've had on here for a while, but there's a lot of stuff that they're just now. But like this is like a few of these have been up a day ago, and look at these artists. You got 47,000 views for this one, 20K for this one, 37 for Goldberg. I mean, so WCW fans are coming out, and people that probably wanted to check out some of the stuff that were not alive. Look at that mess. Stampede 98. Jericho. Oh, I love that. That was when he was calling out all the names of the luchadors that were going to that had the opportunity to wrestle him for his cruiserweight belt, and he was just giving them the craziest names that you could think of. But yeah, there's a lot of good matches in here, and there's a lot of stuff in here that might not have been. I mean, you get to see, if you weren't alive for that time period, just how at times WCW was just a mess, especially after '97. There's been always this complaint about the disqualification matches, and there were always run-ins, and that was the thing. But to get into it a little bit, this was needed. I've never been a real big WWF WWE fan. I'd watch it from time to time. I watched more WCW back in the day. That goes with probably had to be early 97, like maybe in the spring of 97, somewhere around there. My brothers were watching like wrestling one night. And I remember, I'm 16 years old, and I remember like they're watching this, and I'm going, "What the hell are you guys watching this stuff for, man? Don't you know this stuff is fake?" And don't get mad at me for saying it's fake. That's when I was 16 years old. You're gonna say that stuff, and I'm gonna try to change the channel, and they're not having it. They complain, I think, to my dad at the time, so we have to stay and watch it. And I remember sitting there, just can't believe that we have to watch wrestling. And then the next thing I know, I'm hooked every Monday night, until basically, the early 2000s when WCW was bought out and was went over to WWE, watched a little bit of that, and then just wasn't for me anymore. But yeah, so from early 97 to about, 2001ish, 2002, so when I was about 20, 21, my Monday nights were watching wrestling. Unless Tampa was on a Monday night football game, then unfortunately I was watching that. But the sheer grip that both shows had on the public at that time was just outrageous. I mean, they were beating Monday Night Football, anything in the ratings at that time, they were beating them out. And that might not seem like a lot, but back in the late 90s, that was a big deal to beat Monday Night Football, because Monday Night Football ruled Monday night. And even Raw when it first was on, and Nitro when it first became Monday Night Nitro, I think in like 95, weren't really doing well with their numbers. They're pulling them out 600,000, 700,000, whatever it was. I mean, they weren't really doing extremely well. It was just average numbers. And then, of course, the infamous Hogan heel turn, and that sent WCW's ratings through the roof. I mean, through the roof. They were hitting it on all cylinders. And again, I wasn't there for that part. Me and my brothers weren't. I remember late 96, early 97, you started seeing people wearing NWO shirts around my high school. And I didn't quite, like, I didn't understand what it was about. And I remember somebody saying it was for wrestling, and even I was like, God, like, what are we doing? Not knowing, like, in 2 years I'd be wearing a red and black NWO shirt around school, and along with my Diamond Dallas Page, uh, with him doing this and the diamond logo on my shirt, walking around. So little did I know. But I mean, the nostalgia of this, and it's so funny watching these matches now, because it's like there's the way that I remember watching them as a kid, and then rewatching them now, and it almost seems like I'm watching it from a different viewpoint, if that makes sense. It's like nothing's changed on it. Nothing's changed. It's just it's been 28 years or so, and your memory's not exactly what you remember it as at that point. That's just how life is. You remember things differently. And it's so funny to watch some of this stuff and either go, holy crap, how did we not see either how bad this was? Or like, oh man, look, you can see like them making calls in the ring or tapping or talking to each other. It's like when we were kids, man, this stuff was real. Like you believed it was real. And it's so funny to watch it now, and you get that kind of like that nostalgic feel, like, oh yeah, I remember that, I remember watching that. And then you get that whole like, oh man, I don't like that really went that way, like that. Well, okay. It's like earlier they were showing the first episode of Thunder, which was amazingly comical, not in the sense of the wrestling, but in the sense of the setup. Like, I don't know if you remember, and you can find it on here, the setup was this giant, like, stone. It was basically foam wall, but it looked like stone. And it would open up in the middle, like shift in and out like this. There would be a fog machine pushing fog out, and there are these laser lights shooting out of it, because everything in the 90s was laser lights. It was, laser tag, and the raves and whatnot had laser everywhere. And it was just like this half setup thing. Like, it didn't even really cover much of that area where the wrestlers were coming out. Like honestly, it looked like something that'd be on like their Saturday night show. It looked comical. And I remember like when that episode first came on, and I remember looking at that going like, the hell is this? Like this is ridiculous. It was one of those things watching it again on one of these episodes. I think it was one of the live episodes. At one point, you can actually see where the cameraman goes up to the door. You can see the legs. They had to manually pull the door apart. It wasn't even electronically connected to anything. So you had guys that were standing on the back that would open the door, would open the door, and the wrestlers would walk out, and it made it look even cheaper. And thank God that after I think it was only for like a month, and they got rid of it. It went to that more steel, like kind of city look to it, which was 10 times better than that stupid foam rubber. I wish they would have done like what Raw did a couple years ago when they were going to change the setup of the look, and they just threw wrestlers through it to break it. I wish WCW would have done that. They would have just tore it apart because it was just a comically funny setup for a show. It was one of those things too because that Thunder was stacked as far as the card was. You had Jericho and Flair, you had DDP and Kevin Nash wrestling each other for the American belt. Hogan was on there. I think even Sting was on there. I don't remember if it was, but that might have been the episode where he turned the belt over to Hogan. You had Bret Hart, I think, show up on. You just had all the A-listers on that show, and it was to promote this new show, the Raw show or the Thunder show. And then, of course, after that, Hogan maybe would show up once every 3 months on Thunder. It just basically became. I remember when Thunder came here to Tallahassee. Yeah, Hogan wasn't a part of that, and everybody thought he might because he lives in Tampa, but he didn't. But we had Goldberg, who was still on his rise because this was in '98. I think he might have had the U.S. title. You had Raven because it was Raven and his flock versus Goldberg at the time. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were there with a couple of the NWO guys. That might have been the time Scott Steiner turned. I can't remember because this was like late '98. He might have gone to NWO. I just remember that his brother got power bombed by Kevin Nash in the ring, and he looked so tiny being picked up by Kevin Nash. Jericho, I do believe, was a part of that show, and it was one of those things where you found out years later, but apparently that Tallahassee show on Thunder was supposed to be because it was talked about that Ric Flair was going to be at that show, and then of course he wasn't at that show, and back in those days it was never announced or it was never explained. It was just you thought, oh, well, something happened, couldn't make it or whatever, and you found out they were gonna do a new Four Horsemen. And that Ric Flair was going to show up and announce the new Four Horsemen and three other guys. Don't know who. I can't remember who it was. There's rumors about who it was going to be. And that was going to be the thing. But apparently, at that point, like he no showed. He was upset with his contract or whatever, so he no showed. And I don't remember if Eric Bischoff came out and said anything about him not showing up. Oh, I don't know if I don't know if he said it to the crowd or if he went on camera like on with the booth with Tony Schiavone and them and said something. But I just remember that like Ric Flair then ended up suing, and it got settled out of court or whatever. And like a month or two later, Ric Flair came back. But yeah, so we could have had a new Four Horsemen, kind of history depending on how you look at it in Tallahassee on that Thunder episode, but it didn't happen. Um, but yeah, so I think they're even showing some of the old WCW stuff from back in the '80s on the live on this live launch party. If you like nostalgia, even if you weren't a fan of it, if you were a hardcore WWF fan because it was a WWF at that time, go back and check some of these out. I mean, it's a part of wrestling history. If you weren't alive at that time, if you um, have no clue what it was like to have two competing wrestling companies on the same night. Go and check some of these shows out. Now, yeah, you're going to see some great shows, and then you're going to see some just horrendous, comically awful shows that make you go, how did people watch this back in the day? Um, the stuff before Hogan turned in WCW, yeah, was pretty comical, but WWF at the same time was still pretty comical too. It was more generated towards kids. The stuff after Hogan turned was where it started to become like you still had your your off shows or your shows that were like what, like they don't make sense, but they started having a better storyline, I guess you could say, with WCW at that time. And that was when, of course, the 83 weeks started, where WCW just crushed WWF in the ratings. And then when forced Vince McMahon's hand to become more adult oriented and more reality show oriented, in which you had Stone Cold and DX start doing their thing. And then you had the ratings sway more that way. It's like I remember at school, that's when you started seeing more of the Stone Cold and the DX shirts at school and less of the NWO. Because Stone Cold and DX were becoming more of the pop culture coolness at that time. Um, but man, it's like if you weren't alive at that time, you really won't get or understand the sense of what it was like. From you had the main Raw when it started, and then WCW going from Saturday night to taking it to Monday night and doing it live, which Raw at the time was not. Raw was pre-recorded, and so or pre-recorded every other week, whatever it was. And here you had Nitro that was live, and I remember their first show was, and I'm pretty sure it's down here. I think I talked about it, where Lex Luger shows up on Nitro, and they're doing it out of the Mall of America in Minneapolis. But the story behind that was Lex Luger was with WWF. His contract had run out. WWF, which people might find surprising, but it still happens with them. I mean, it happened with a few of their wrestlers in the last couple years that went over to AEW. They did not pay attention to the contract, and it ran out. And when they finally figured it out, that guy had left, and Lex Luger was one of them. His contract had run out, and Eric Bischoff had basically signed Lex Luger under Vince's nose, and Luger wanted to tell Vince, that his contract was up, he was leaving, but Bischoff didn't want to tell him that because he knew that um, Vince McMahon would say something about it on his show or would bring it up at some point, and he wanted that shock factor, and he didn't tell Vince, and you had Luger showing up just randomly on Nitro, and people didn't know. And this was, this was when the internet was still at its infancy. You didn't have your phone to read the dirt sheets or to read these different things. That's one thing that you can probably kind of hate about these days is there's no shock factor anymore. There's really no shock factor as far as people just showing up on different shows or different companies. Back in those days, you just had people jumping left and right, and unless you were a complete nerd in wrestling and knew the forums or knew the websites and went to them and found out or read the papers because they would send newsletters out, you didn't know until you were watching that Monday night who would show up when and where. And it became one of those things where it was people were switching sides left and right from time to time, that once a month you'd have a new person showing up. And so you were watching both Nitro or Raw to see if somebody new was going to debut or jump over or whatever. And it's one of those things that that you don't get now because there's so much hype for it. I think the two that really surprised me as far as showing up in different companies was when Sting showed up in AEW, because that I don't think people expected that, and then he was there, and also when he's Aleister Black, but he also goes as Malachi or whatever. When he showed up on AEW, when Cody Rhodes was still there, those were because nobody knew it was happening, it just happened, and those are the ones that you like. It's like everybody knew Cody Rhodes was coming. everybody knew Joe Cargill was coming over to WWE. Um, that whole surprise and shock of somebody jumping from one company to another is just completely gone because you can find out who's jumping, a month before they even jump. So that's some of the stuff that I kind of hate and miss about that time period. But man, I mean, it's one of those where your Monday and Thursday night, and when SmackDown came on, I think it was Wednesday nights or Tuesday nights, whenever it was at first. The next day at school, that's all you were talking about with your buddies was what had happened, or if it was a good show, if it was a bad show, if this wrestler should win or that wrestler should win. And it's one of those things again, like when you look back at it now, there were a lot of times where me and my brothers, yeah, we would watch, especially when it came to WCW, and they would have like when you had Hogan versus Nash, and you had the finger poke of doom, and it was hyped up, you're getting all ready for it, and then they hit you with that nonsense. And it was stuff like that. It was when they would have 20 million run-ins in different championship matches that would then go to DQ or would go to the wrestler that you wanted to win get knocked out and losing. And it just started to become ridiculous, and it started to just become like, oh, this again, and you just didn't want to put up with it anymore. So I yeah, it was one of those situations where you kind of had the good and the bad and the ugly with WCW from late '97 till the very end, and you had just Hogan having the belt on him too many times, all the time. You had just creative that was horrible. You had Bret Hart just being wasted in WCW. You had different individuals that came over that just didn't fit. Um, you had talent that should have been used that they just didn't use because you had older guys with creative control of their contracts that wouldn't allow things to happen. Jericho being one of them. I mean, he got so tired of it that he left and went to WWF. And I remember I mean, he's the one intro, the um, one guy that I remember going from WCW to WWF. The pop that he got when he came out was just wild. But there was a lot of great matches and a lot of just they would have their show at Club La Vila on spring break, and they'd have the ring in the middle of the pool. Just the craziness that would happen with that. I mean, you maybe had 2,000 people if you're lucky at Club La Vila, at Club La Vila, and this was at the height of wrestling at the time when they're doing WWF or WCW at a Club La Vila for spring break. I mean, just wild things like that. Sturgis, doing pay-per-view events at Sturgis out in the middle of some damn field with a bunch of biker dudes revving up their motorcycles, drunk and high on who knows what. I mean, guns probably in the crowd. You just craziness, good times. And then of course you had when WCW went under because Ted Turner had to sell a lot of his assets, and Time Warner, who bought TBS and TNT, didn't want wrestling on there anymore. They didn't want wrestling, and they basically sold it for cheap, which Vince McMahon bought, and that was the end of. I mean, on some level, that was the end of professional wrestling as a whole, because once they didn't have that market to compete against, I mean, you had some good times with WWE after that, but as a whole, it just wasn't. I mean, like I said, I stopped watching. I would check in from time to time over that time period, but the minute they bought out WCW and then did the stupid invasion angle, and then the way they treated the WCW wrestlers, just like sideshow freaks. I just it just wasn't for me anymore. I would watch from time to time. But I think I mean, I like honestly, I think I gave up on it in, like I said, 2002. I would come in from time to time to check and see, watch Jericho or see if they put DDP back on the way he was, or like when The Rock would come through from time to time. But for the most part, I didn't care. So like from 2002 even till now, there's a lot of things that I just haven't seen in WWE, and I'm sure there's a lot of people saying, "Well, I've missed a lot," and maybe I have. I just didn't care. And I'm glad there's another competing company with AEW. Um, and damn, like the people on social media just get so twisted about hating either one product or the other. Who cares, dude? Just be glad that the wrestlers now have options. That was the big thing about this time period, was you had wrestlers that could jump from one company to another, get paid, and also reinvent themselves. Like Nash and Hall, both were in WCW before they went to WWF, and they were just mid card guys. Nash was Oz at one point, and Vinny Vegas, and then you had Scott Hall as a Diamond Stud with Diamond Dallas, and like they were all in like a faction or whatever. And they both left and went to WWF and became Razor Ramon, which Razor Ramon was basically a character that the Diamond Stud was, but became more Cubanish, like more Scarface. And then you had Kevin Nash go over and became Diesel. And then when their contracts were up, they got paid even more to jump back to WCW, and they just used their names and revolutionized the business. Imagine if you didn't have that. I mean, wrestling probably wouldn't be what it is now. It might even be dead. Jericho being able to jump from WCW to WWF. Hogan being able to go from WWF to WCW, even though he ran the red and white for a while, but being able to go heel and becoming Hollywood Hogan. Hell, The Undertaker, he started out in WCW and went over to WWF and became The Undertaker. So if you don't have a competing interest, one, you're going to have a sorry product, which a lot of people will admit. WWE, for the last 20, 25 years, has just not been that good. And especially in the last 10 has not been that good. And it's because they didn't have to compete against anybody. If you're only competing against yourself, you're putting out garbage product. AEW came out and made them up their game a little bit. And then of course with Vince being removed, they've upped their game a little bit. But it's set up this business to where wrestlers can get paid more, which is great. There's no, you're not gonna get a bottom line. They're gonna get decent money for themselves, both the men and the women. So I never understood why people wish a death of a company. That's just weird tribalism and just weird to me. It's again, I was never a big WWF WWE guy, but I didn't sit there and go, oh man, yeah, I hope they put them out of business because that product sucks. No, I just it was whatever. I just didn't care. I enjoyed my WCW product and watched it. Did I flip more to WWF when WCW was in their going into their crap period in 98, 99? Yeah. In 2000? Yeah. We were switching more over because they had a better thing going. Um, but hey, at least we had an option. It's always better to have options. It only makes your product better. Um, but yeah, if you get a chance, go check it out. Again, I think this whole weekend they're just doing live. I would click on it, but I was afraid I'd get hit with a copyright because that's how this world is now. Even though I'm not making any money off of this, and not worried about making any money off this, but go and check out some of these old WCW stuff. Watch that live feed and just enjoy a great time in wrestling that we'll probably never have back again. Won't be anything close. Um, but watch Sting go from Surfer Sting to Crow Sting to NWO Wolfpack Sting. Um, that evolution. Watch DDP become like a manager to becoming probably more of the people's champ than The Rock was at times. Check out the oh man, I mean the Macho Man or DDP trifecta. I think it was 3 matches that they had in '97. Oh my God, those were great. You got to give those a watch if you can find those on there. But yeah, check it out. You know, give it some time. Have a little bit of class. Have a little bit of expand your mind a little bit and check it out. But like I said, with that, we'll just end that here. Um, I'll do we'll do an update with the Gene Hackman stuff and the Harry Potter fans being pissed off. Because when are they ever not pissed off? Apparently. Um, for tomorrow, we'll do that for another episode. But yeah, man, hey, nostalgia, it's fun. But hey, get outside this weekend too. Get outside, live life, and find some good earth and dig it. All right. All right. Have a good weekend, y'all.